In part 1 of this video, I explain the meaning of the numbers and letters on the stone that was recently removed from the Georgia Guidestones. For decoding, I was inspired by the relation between the dots on opposite sides of any regular dice. I also showed that there is a perfect numerical relation between the letters and the numbers, showing that there is no coincidence but a deliberate coding. My conclusion was a date, being October the 3rd, 2014. So what happened on the 3rd of October? No large terrorist attack, 9/11 style. No massive natural disaster. Some started to comment that yet another conspiracy theory had failed to prove itself. But I stated that the date likely had to do everything with the start of the New World Order plan, as laid out on the Guidestones. And it seems that exactly that is the case. On the slabs of the Georgia Guidestones we find the so-called 10 Commandments for an Age of Reason. The very first of these commandments has to do with the size of the world's population. Bringing back humanity to 500 million means a reduction of approximately 93%. One big head start could be one or more deadly diseases. And it was indeed October the 3rd that the first case of Ebola on US soil exploded in the news. The man that supposedly brought Ebola into the US, Thomas Duncan, has now died, and more infected people are being reported every day. This could indeed have been the start of not only the population reduction, but of a cascade of events. Think of the economic crash, martial law, etc. But is there any other way that this outbreak of Ebola can be linked to the Georgia Guidestones and to the New World Order? The answer is yes. As others have already noted, there has been an episode of The Simpsons where a book cover is shown having the title Curious George and the Ebola Virus. This might seem insignificant, but it has already been proven that there were also hints to other events in Simpson episodes, the most famous being 9/11. However, this could have been a coincidence, but there is more. This particular episode of The Simpsons was aired on September 11, 1997, a date that raises a red flag, obviously. So let's take a look at the character of the monkey George. Wikipedia writes, "The books feature a curious brown monkey named George, who is brought from his home in Africa by the man with the yellow hat to live with him in a big city." Just like the Ebola virus, George was taken from Africa to the USA. His name, George, could hint to the Georgia Guidestones. In the last of the original series of books, dating 1966, George ends up in the hospital, just like the first Ebola victim, Thomas Duncan. But wait, there is more. In the aforementioned quote from Wikipedia, we read that George was brought or taken to the USA. This means a deliberate action. He was taken by the man with the yellow hat, after he caught George. If George represents the virus, then the man with the yellow hat represents the carrier, Thomas Duncan. This is what Wikipedia writes about this mysterious man. The man is never mentioned by name in the original adventures, or in any subsequent content over more than 6 decades. He is always called either the man or fully the man with the yellow hat. When people speak to George about the man, they often refer to him as your friend. However, in the Curious George film in 2006, the man is referred to as Ted throughout the film. So it was not until 2006 that the man who brought George from Africa got a name, Ted. Let us now look at our man who brought Ebola from Africa, Thomas Eric Duncan. His initial spell, Ted. And yes, I could not help but think of the many men in yellow that we see on the news so often now, even in the cleaning of the very apartment where Thomas Duncan stayed. All in all, quite a few coincidences, I would say. I'm not suggesting that everything has been necessarily carefully planned as such. As I stated in the previous video, there are evil forces at work. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. What we see is often but a manifestation of the things that are happening on a spiritual level. Let's keep our eyes open and see how things develop. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them.